crisis in Syria. That briefing set to happen a few hours from now. But we are learning the president has already spoken personally with House Speaker John Boehner. More on that in a moment. But this news comes as a senior defense official confirms that a fifth U.S. warship is making its way towards Syria ahead of any possible strike. President Obama yesterday said he's concluded the Syrian government used chemical weapons against its own people, and he said there needs to be international consequences. Still, the attempt to rally support for action seems to be running into a bit of trouble. Some members of Congress are demanding that they give approval before any strike. The United Nations Secretary General today pleading for more time for inspectors to finish their investigation. And the United States' closest ally, Britain, has indicated it would wait for the inspectors' report before coming to any military action. Just about an hour ago, the White House responded saying the president doesn't need to wait for Britain's approval.
When the president reaches a determination about the appropriate response to this circumstance, and a legal justification is required to substantiate or to back up that decision, we'll produce one on our own. We're not going to rely on somebody else's.
Meantime, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad remains defiant, denying that his forces used chemical weapons at all and vowing to defend his country against any attacks. We have live Team Fox coverage. Leland Vittert live in our Mideast Bureau, where several nations are on edge. But we begin with the latest from the administration. Ed Henry is live for us at the White House. And Ed, how pivotal is tonight's intel briefing to these deliberations?
Extremely pivotal, Trace, because we have now reached the critical stage in all of this in terms of the administration finally making its case to the American people. It will start at 6 p.m. Eastern time tonight, as you suggested. This teleconference that's going to happen, Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, John Kerry, the Secretary of State, other top officials like the Director of National Intelligence, we're told, will be on this call. The reason why it's a phone call is that members of Congress are on their August recess right now. They're spread around the country, spread around the world. So the administration wants to show they're consulting Congress, although they're stopping short of actually getting a vote in Congress to approve any potential military force. And what's interesting is you have some Republicans like Congressman Mike Rogers, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, saying he's backing the president up on all of this and potential military action, but he's surprised that the public case has not been ramped up, that this intelligence hasn't been shown to the world yet. Take a listen.
Having a phone call in an unsecure manner is not going to allow people to ask the questions that we need to get answered so that we can buy into where the president's going.
So you see a Republican there who is backing the president, but saying, look, you've got to have an even more robust consultation with Congress, maybe a debate on the Hill. At the very least, what Speaker John Boehner is saying, you mentioned a few moments ago, we've just learned that Speaker Boehner and the president had a phone call for the first time about Syria. A few days ago, Boehner got a call from a White House aide, but just in the last little while got a call from the president, got an update. But Boehner is still demanding that the president come forward, address the American people, explain the potential mission here, and actually lay out what intelligence the U.S. has to back up its claims against Syria, Trace.
And Ed, if you look at the Iraq WMD problem, which I know the Brits are very concerned about, how sure is the White House about the evidence they have against Syria?
Whole series of tough questions for the White House at their daily briefing today on whether or not they're 110% certain that the Syrian government has been in complete control of its chemical weapons stockpile, whether or not the rebels could have gotten their hands on any of the chemical weapons. Or reports out today suggesting among mid-level officials in the Obama administration, anonymously saying they're not sure the Syrian government has had full custody of those chemical weapons. So Josh Earnest was pressed again and again on that and insisted they're certain inside the White House that the Syrian government was responsible. And I pressed him on what happened to getting congressional authorization, getting the UN behind this. Here's what he said.
What happened to the Barack Obama of 2008 who said you got to go to the UN, you got to get a resolution, you got to go to Congress?
What we're seeing right now is Russia repeatedly block efforts at the UN to hold the Assad regime accountable. That is very disappointing, but the President of the United States is not going to allow that obstruction to prevent him from making decisions that are in the best interest of our national security. And when it comes to Congress, the President believes strongly in robust congressional consultation.
Now, Josh Earnest again repeated, as they have all week, that the president has not made a final decision on whether to move forward with U.S. military action. But we all know from that PBS interview last night, the president directly talked about potentially a shot across the bow against Assad in Syria. That is as close as he's come to confirming he's planning some sort of military action, Trace.
And Ed, talk of a possible strike is causing tensions all across the Middle East. Iran is again warning the United States to stand down, vowing that any attack on Syria would lead to the, quote, imminent destruction of Israel. The head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard said that any U.S. campaign would become a, quote, second Vietnam. Leland Vittert is live in Jerusalem. And Leland, what are the chances this could actually turn into a bigger conflict, a regional war?
Every day that goes by, Trace, every party involved here is making more threats, counter threats, promises that at some point may be backed up. Today, the Israeli chief of staff says that if we are attacked, we will respond fiercely and forcefully. Of course, the Syrians have promised that they will make Tel Aviv burn. They have the ability to do it as well. A look at their military strength shows a lot of weapons that can be used against the Israelis, from Scud missiles, other long-range surface-to-surface missiles, heavy air defenses. Of course, we know the Syrians have a large amount of chemical weapons stockpiled. Whether they'd be willing to use them or not is up for debate. Already in the region, tensions are very high. The Turkish military has already put themselves on alert. And then also we're hearing now that their U.S. fleet off the Mediterranean coast may have some company, Trace. The Russians are moving their destroyers into place off the Mediterranean coast. So certainly, if there is a strike, you're going to have a lot of firepower and a lot of people very jittery with their hands near those buttons. Back to you.
And with all of these threats, Leland, how is Israel preparing exactly?
Well, they are certainly concerned here, as evidenced by the long lines, thousands of people lining up to try and get gas masks. The government provides gas masks here, but not every citizen has one. Not every citizen has canisters that are up to date in the event that there was a chemical attack. People are willing to wait in the hot sun to make sure they have theirs before the missiles fly.
There is a panic because the news is that there is going to be an imminent attack either sometime today or over the weekend, and no one wants to be caught without a mask.
And the Israelis are never shy to speculate here. The front page of the main newspaper here, this is their Iron Dome missile defense system that has been deployed. The headline here, after tonight, it could come any time. And Trace, it is already tonight here in the Middle East. Back to you.
Leland Vittert live for us tonight in Jerusalem. Leland, thank you. Joining me now is William Cohen. He's the former Secretary of Defense during the Clinton administration. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time, sir.
Good to be with you.
Yesterday, it seemed like strikes were imminent. Today, it seems like progress much more slow. What's your take on the development, sir?
My take is that the mission has not been clearly defined. Exactly what is it we intend to do, and what are the consequences that are likely to flow from that? It's not just we can take a one-off position, fire some Tomahawk missiles, and take out a few sites. There are consequences that flow from that, and I think that Congress is rightly demanding some answers to the questions. Speaker Boehner has raised at least 10 questions. He has an obligation to his membership. The president has an obligation to bring him in, to sit down and go over the intelligence and persuade the speaker that he should be joining this. Mike Rogers, Congressman Rogers, you had on before. Very important voice in the House. So the president has a lot of work to do. I think he should go to the UN, present the evidence to the Security Council, force the Russians to veto it, and then label the Russians the ones who are supporting a Syrian dictatorship, basically, that's gassing its children. So I think that the president has an obligation, UN, also the Congress, and then present a kind of comprehensive package, a strategic package to the key members of Congress, and so we can persuade the American people this is another military mission that has grave consequences for everybody.
So expanding on your point, sir, we know the United Nations is not going to approve this. Let's go to Britain. What if the Brits come out next week or this weekend and say they are also not going to go along with this? Do we back off?
Well, the pillars of support are turning into pillars of salt. We had the support, theoretically, of the Arab League. The Arab League has pulled away. We had the support of a number of the Brits are pulling back now. So is this going to be a unilateral action on the part of the United States without members of Congress being on board? We expect the Russians to say no. But if we present the evidence that it's clearly a chemical weapons attack upon the Syrian people by the Syrian government, then I think the president has a case to make to the American people that this is action that can't go without redress. But he's got to present a plan that really takes into account multiple contingencies. What happens if? What happens if the Russians were moving their ships and intervene in some way? What if they resupply the Syrians? What if the Iranians do so? All of these questions need to be addressed before you launch an attack rather than afterwards playing an ad hoc catch-up game and calling audibles that have grave consequences. So I think there's work to be done.
Yeah, work to be done. Former Defense Secretary William Cohen. Mr. Secretary, thank you, sir.
Good to be with you.